yeah. Speaking of which, so we tracked for last year's data. It was about 17 leads per deal, right, Brian?
Yeah,
that's about what we worked at there. Is that something, Tyler, that you see across the board, or something
No,
similar?
that's really good.
Is
That's
that?
like, yeah, that's excellent actually. 17 leads per deal is really, really good. Depending on what type of data you're focusing on, is really the determining factor of how good it is. If it was straight high equity data, then you guys need to call more high equity and just like go fucking ham. Because most people are like 70 to 75 to 1 right now with high equity data. Yeah.
They were tracking what a lead is a little differently than.
Yeah. So look back. I mean, it's really good information to have is then to look back and figure out like what were the problems in that. Like looking to ramp up your current marketing strategy, like go back to those, which you might have already done, and figure out what is the vexations that were on each of those properties. Because sometimes what we do is, especially those in the REISift communities, we tend to, because of the list stacking aspect of things and the deep prospecting and all that kind of stuff, we tend to think that it has to be like that tax delinquent code enforcement probate, living on the moon type scenario. And it's just not necessarily true, because most of your revenue could be coming from somebody who just has another property. And that's like, could be totally normal in your market. And so, if you look that up and just kind of figure that out, you could realize that because you're thinking that you need to go more niche, it's actually costing you revenue, because really you need to go wider, which I don't really talk about too often, simply because it's not the norm for 70% of the people. But it is the norm in some markets, especially markets that have a lot of really low income pockets. The really niche stuff doesn't work as well, which I know St. Louis has a lot of really niche low income areas. Sometimes like tax delinquency is not a really good list there, because there's a ton of tax delinquent properties, for example, right? And so when you're going niche, you have to be really careful on going too niche, and you got to kind of keep it a little layer back. But did you guys do that research yet? Have you looked out of those deals, the 70 to 1, like what is the primary type of problem?
No, I mean, that's something we were just talking about the other day. We're going to have to like go back to every deal and kind of research it. So this is one thing that led me to gravitate to REISift, Tyler, is just to understand our data better. Like the first year that we were doing the business, we were outsourcing our direct mail to a company that had a proprietary list that we didn't own. We didn't have the data. So they would just mail to it. We'd get the inbound leads, and it worked for a while. Yeah. But we didn't own the data to call it or text it or to do other things with it, or understand, what those vexations might be. So that's something we've tried to bring back in-house. And honestly, I just have not figured out the data piece yet.
Okay.
So the stuff we've been Sensei flowing to so far, which we started back in January, I pretty much took all the data we had in batch and, basically boiled it down to the stacked vacant properties. And that's what we started with, just to get going until I could figure out how we're going to get new inbound data.
So one thing I'll just mention, just because you mentioned vacancy, I've been trying to press this across the community at REISift, and just anybody that I talk to that's like, oh, well, I focus on vacant data. Vacancy is going to be your lowest contact rate. Just by nature of the type of data that it is. They're vacant. They could have been vacant for 10 years, could have been vacant for 1 month. The numbers that are associated with that property might not be accurate at all. So you got to be careful when you need revenue today, focusing strictly on vacant because of that. You want to try to find vexations that are like more immediate, right? More immediately happen. So the vexation is fresh, but also there's an urgency behind how quickly that vexation needs to be solved, right? That's why probate's pretty effective as well. Inherited's good. Recently inherited properties are good because it could have already been probate. Now it's been inherited, and now like it's open to sale. Pre-probate obviously comes with its own hassle, but the probate realm is really good because of this. But obviously there is that delayed, revenue aspect of things unless that probate's already finished. And so straight vacancy is a little bit difficult on that. However, newly vacant's good, and owner occupied vacancy is also really interesting because of the fact that hey, is it really? So in your REISift account, filter by absentee no, and then vacant yes. And so how many of those records are there? There might only be 200 or 300 of them, but typically those are what you're seeing people getting, Deal Machine and Driving for Dollar stuff from, because they're adding these properties in there. They look super distressed, but it's because someone had passed away a long time ago and nobody ever filed probate. No one knows that they even passed away potentially. So there's a lot of opportunity in like those kind of niche lists. But like straight absentee vacant, you're going to have a low contact rate potentially. Everyone's situation is a little bit different, but
yeah, I mean, I think that's what we come to find out. It's you either can't find them, or the property's sold already, or they're deceased, and you're tracking down the family members. So, which can be gold. Yeah. I don't have that layer of deep research set up yet.
Right.
We were doing probate for a while. That list we had to buy that list. It was $1,000 a month, so it was just hard to keep up with.
Holy crap! Where were you buying that from for $1,000 a month?
We were buying that through REI print mail.
Do you have a better source?
Yes, I have a very So, in fact, if you let them know that your REISift, I think is like 10% off or something like that. I'm not really sure. They reached out to me like 2 weeks ago, I think it was roughly, and they're like, "Hey, by the way, like you've been sending a bunch of people our way, and we'd like to do a webinar with you or something." Like, I ain't really sent anybody your way. I mean, I've mentioned you guys a few times, but it's not like I sent like an affiliate code or anything. Well, they say they're from you. I'm like, well, I mean, sure. But it's Foreclosure Daily. Yeah, Foreclosure Daily. I mean, they just know, I guess. I don't know if there's a link. I don't know anything like that. But if you just call them and say, "Hey, I'm with REISift," that way they'll give you a discount or whatever. And that's for anybody else too. If you want to get probate or foreclosure data, like I don't know anybody that's as accurate with probate data as them. I think it's like within 7 days. Especially in Florida, I know for certain, because they live in Florida and that's where they started. So they have Foreclosure Daily, probate something, but if you go to their main website, foreclosuredaily.com, you can get to all their probate and everything. And what's really cool about it is once you get set up and access to it, you just go in there on a monthly basis and you just log into your portal and you can just download everything right from there. Here's the one downfall to it. Well, okay, so they have inherited, probate, and pre-probate. I recommend starting with pre-probate because the pre-probate is going to turn into the probate and inherited at some point. So you might as well get it earlier than later. And then with that, with the inherited list specifically, and maybe even with the pre-probate, I can't quite remember, you only get like the property address, right? So you don't get a mailing address or anything like that. So that's kind of a downfall, but it makes sense because of, and sometimes there's a personal rep, and most of the time there's not, because they're pre-probate, right? Pre-probate, there is no personal rep to be assigned yet. So how you want to market to those individuals is you want to market to the deceased initially, because when you skip trace the deceased owner, what happens? Like if you try to skip trace me, it's not going to show up with my number. It's going to be my wife's number. She fucking hates it. She gets calls all the time asking for me, and it's because whenever I go out, and you guys tell me what you do with your wives, but if we go out to like CVS or any of these other stores and they ask for like a phone number for discount, like I don't fucking put mine in. My wife goes up to the register, she puts her information in. If we go to the place to fill out a form anywhere, I fucking hand it to my wife. It's all for men, at least mostly it's the wife that fills out the forms and does all that kind of shit. So that's typically why a lot of times it's the spouse, actually, that phone number is going to be found because that information is being sold. And so so a lot of people don't skip trace the deceased because they can't wrap their head around, like, why would I do that? They're dead. It's going to have no contact rate. Like, yeah, but your one number out of the 10 phone numbers or whatever you buy could potentially be the actual person. The rest of them are associated individuals and so on and so forth, right? Which is typically the person that you're going to have to reach out to anyway for a deceased property. So always start with the deceased, and then using like a process like sequential marketing, whether it's in bulk or through a process like Sensei Flow, all you got to do is figure out who are you not reaching out of those deceased individuals, what family members are we not reaching, and then throw them into that process to now see, okay, let me try to find, a family member or something like that.